This is part 2 of the video because I looked down at the screen and it said temperature, emergency temperature too hot, cool iPad down. So I did. So now we're sitting in the shade and I apologize for not being able to see me, but I had to sit a certain place and this was the best view for us to continue this conversation. So when I was talking about, I feel that we're the mediators between imbalance and balance, between destruction and construction, between harmony and disharmony, that we're the balance point, or in the work we do called the meta point. And as I listened to Georgia, after having been in this super consciousness of a expanded mystical nature of nether worlds, the worlds of the ethers, the etheric plane, as she shared about Rita the cat and other things that just couldn't seem to be reconciled, the working with things. You're looking at Molly right now. The looking at things and not being able to have them get well or change or be fixed, that they seem to persist regardless of the amount of intention and action that was taken. I realized that where I had been was kind of outside the human psyche as a collective event. And that I had been looking in on, because as I shared it with Georgia, I began to cry because I wondered why I was left out. But I wasn't left out. I was simply looking in from a different loca during the last few days. But what I saw was how hard it is for humanity to wrestle with life and death and unworkability and workability, and the places that don't create certainty that larger forces are afoot, and how hard we fight to have bad things not happen, which is really a good thing because it means we're part of the operating state of creation and we're bringing our weight to restoring balance. And given that so much is deconstructing and collapsing and going out of existence, of course we'd all be throwing our weight on bringing things into existence that live in unity with life, and we'd be throwing our weight on constructing our lives in such a way that we were not part of the imbalance. All these things that humanity has been doing for quite a while, actually, in our lifetime, for sure. And I realize that as a mystic and a seer and a prophet, I often go through these schisms in the past, not so much in my later years, but where it would all just seem so irreconcilable. Because it isn't reconcilable if we're on the side of good or on the side of health or on the side of life. I realize how tender and how fragile the human psyche is when it confronts life and death, justifiable or unjustifiable according to our own terms. When it faces not being able to make things work, when we've done everything we know how to make them work, and that how easy it was for the human psyche to schism and think something was wrong with itself, and it should know how, and it should know how to always be on the good and always be loving and always be caring. And we forget that it's neither or. It's somewhere in between. Buddha said that. It's the middle of the road. But it's one thing to have these philosophies and to have these dynamics going on with us, with humanity, have this going on. It's another thing to live it in our psyche in the mind of our soul, in experiences that we have that we can't rationalize or logicalize or understand. It's energy, it's ether. It's the ether that when it begins to become into form, it has to split to create duality, which then it's not about what's right or wrong. It's about where's the balance between that which is its time to go out of existence and that which is its time to come into existence, and all the variations or the ratios in between. And that I realized, listening to Georgia, that this is the human experience that humanity is in right now. You could say that the human mind is in a rupture, and that the psyche, the human psyche, is scaling into having to include things that has often broken its spirit, has often left a human being frail and fragile and fearful, and yet if we are to scale into our more complex consciousness, it isn't to justify any of it. It is to be able to include it all and to be actually out beyond it in some way, and instead of what's right or wrong or good or bad, what's ours to do. And to be able to be with experiences that some of us will have, if not all of us, of things that are unreconcilable, that don't make sense. Why I often think of a very famous man's wife who they lived the most pristine existence, and she died of a terrible, terrible cancer. And there was nothing they could do about it. They'd done everything that they knew how to do, and the cancer still won. But isn't there something in between about, regardless of what's irreconcilable, regardless of how bad something can be or how hard it is to be in the face of it, I kind of think that why we have our beautiful earth and why we have our little four-legged creatures and our winged ones is it really helps us with something that we're too young as a species to understand. So in this period of time of where things are being reconciled in chaos, moving from chaos to order, moving and collapsing and expand, deconstruct and construct, things going in and out of existence, things just wonky, things just not able to be controlled, things that are just like when you're in a forest fire or on the edge of a tsunami or you're watching a tornado. You don't know where you'll end up. And I don't think it's a value to look, because we're past the point where we can control things. And one of the things I said to Georgia in our conversation, I was crying, because through the last 3 days, I was saying to the larger consciousness of which I'm a part, I don't want to be present to this. I don't want to open up into this. This is not what I want to have able in my psyche. I don't want this perception. I don't want this awareness. I don't want this awakening. But at the same time, I knew that my cellular system of memory is being stretched past what it could take in. And I knew that the neural network of my mind was being stretched to be able to include more. Not to arrive at a conclusion or a destination, but literally to be able to include more and still find that balance point, still find the beauty of the bees and the lavender and the tree that sits so majestically in front of our dwarf fruit trees, the amazing way that humanity is gifted to be able to move in a chaotic reality that sometimes has to rebalance its systems so its life forms can live. But what I was the most struck with, and what I'm still struck with, and I'm sure those of us that deal with humanity and love humanity and deal with the fragility of the human psyche, is that in a way we're helpless, but we'll still keep going, we'll still try, because that fragility needs to be cared for and loved and treated so gently. That fragility between form and formless, between life and death, between physical and non-physical, between substance and no substance, between this duality that we live in. Because it is irreconcilable, the duality is. We do have both. But what we can do, and Georgia said, I didn't realize that Tantra, it really is every minute. We have to find balance. Every minute. Every second. We have to get attuned. So a deeper pathway of reconciliation is not about being in such a way that bad things don't happen and that challenges aren't before us and that which is irreconcilable doesn't cross our path. Reconciliation is about being able to keep the balance of ourselves in all that, because it's really clear the greater systems of what we're a part in our physical playing field have given us a beautiful world. It's given us so much color and texture and sound and sight and audiency. I do hope that you curl up in that, especially curl up in that when something is happening in your life that is so hard to make sense of, so hard to be with. And I know it's hard even to listen to me, because the mental mind is governed to pick a side, to draw a conclusion, to make sense of things. And my beloved, there are going to be things that can't be made sense of now. There are going to be things that are just part of something happening that we got to be part of, and that we get to share in, whether we like it or not. The interesting thing, even though I've really talked about the difficult part, the interesting thing is that the beauty of our reality is that that while this chaotic reordering is going on, while this shift in consciousness is going on, they're actually both and. We start to have really rich, beautiful moments of experience, because everything's dismantling within us. Everything is beginning to be felt. Everything is beginning to be experienced. So in a way, it forces us to the poet that said, without joy there can be no sorrow, without sorrow there can be no joy. The conversation of balance in the prophet. And it isn't like we know how to do this. It's more that it's important that we share the experience, that we somehow find a way to be with the tenderness and fragility of the human psyche, and to be in the sorrow of that which cannot be reconciled, and be able to have a relationship with it that lets us have strength, stamina, capacity to be part of the beauty of life and part of the magic of reality that lays beyond the activity of when things are in the chaotic activity of reconciliation.